Give me a home, buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where Sammy's heard a discouraging word, and the skies are...
Hello everyone, and welcome to Lee Richardson Zoo's virtual Kansas Day program. My name is Mr. Houston, and I am privileged to be your presenter for this pre-recorded session. I'm very excited to talk to you about the diversity of Kansas habitats, some of the wonderful animals that call our state home. And I am very excited as well to share with you some of our wonderful live animal guests who I'll be bringing out throughout the program. I'll have some pictures and videos to share with you, as well as some animal artifacts to show on screen. So, without any further introduction, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our program. So, first, to orient you all to whereabouts I'm talking to you from, I am recording this in Garden City, Kansas. You can see right down here in the southwest corner of the state is this little gray star. That's where I am. I know I'm talking to a lot of people from across the state today, so if you're coming to us from Wichita, that's about down here. Hutchinson is around here. If you're in Salina, that's up here. There's Manhattan around in there, Topeka over in this area. And you'll notice that on this map, there are lines where the counties are, the different counties of Kansas. That's those gray lines. And then these blue lines represent all of the rivers that run through Kansas. There are also little blue patches that represent lakes. So you can tell by looking at this wonderful map of our state that one half of the state has a lot more rivers and lakes than the other one does. This western half of the state, we don't have a lot of rivers, we don't have a lot of lakes, we just have a lot of dry, open areas that we call prairies. And actually, a lot of our state is covered in prairies. Prairies are generally big grassy areas that don't have a lot of trees. And this map shows us where those prairies are. So, where I live is out here in the west. This is short grass prairie. All of this orange is big open spaces with very short grasses growing. Then as you move a little bit further east, you start to get into this light green. And these green colors are representative of tall grass prairies. Mixed prairies and tall grass prairies, that's essentially the same thing, except instead of very short grasses, like I have out here, I have some more tall grasses and shrubs. It also shows on here where there are forests in Kansas. Now, there aren't many areas of true forest in Kansas. Most of it is prairie. But you can see this brown area down here in the southeast, and this brown area up near Kansas City. Those are true forests, oak and hickory forests. So we have a lot of different kinds of habitats here in Kansas, even though most of it is prairie. And I want you to think about, why would it be the case? Why would most of Kansas be covered in prairie? And the reason is, if you look again at the map, it's because of where the water is. See, compared to a lot of states, we don't have a lot of water in Kansas. We're kind of a dry place. It doesn't rain too very much, especially in the western part of the state. And we don't have very many lakes or rivers coming through the state. And trees need a lot of water to be able to grow properly. So the fact that there's not very much water means there aren't going to be very many trees that grow here naturally. Now there are places where people have brought in trees from other parts of the country and planted them, but most of the trees in Kansas probably aren't here very naturally. A lot of them came over here when pioneers came. So that's why we have so much prairie. That's the main habitat of Kansas. So who lives here in Kansas? That's the next question. aside from you and me and other people, what kinds of animals live here in Kansas? And we have so many wonderful kinds of wildlife here in Kansas. We have reptiles. We have all sorts of different mammals, like the very unique pronghorn, which a lot of people call an antelope. It isn't a real antelope, but it does look a lot like antelope. It's kind of related to other hoofed animals like giraffes and deer. And they're from out here in the prairie. There are bobcats all throughout Kansas. Bobcats are super, super cool carnivores that live here. And then some of our wonderful reptiles and amphibians, like the ornate box turtle and this hog-nosed snake, all from the state of Kansas. And there are so many wonderful wildlife species that live here in Kansas that we've adopted some of them as our state symbols. So I want to talk about a little bit what our state symbols are. Now, a lot of people know what Kansas's state flower is because it's also our state nickname. We are the Sunflower State. So our state flower is the sunflower. But some of these other symbols might be a little less well known, like our state insect, which of course is the wonderful honeybee. Honeybees are really, really important to us as Kansans because we are a state of farmers. And honeybees are one of those insects that pollinate plants. They help plants to grow properly and to create seeds. So without pollinators like honeybees, all of the farmers who need plants like corn and wheat and all sorts of other grains, they would be out of luck. Insects, and especially pollinators, are really, really important. That's why we have the honeybee there. Now, our state bird is another one that I think a lot of people might recognize if you've driven out on rural highways and looked on the fence posts. This is the meadowlark. So meadowlarks are found all throughout the great state of Kansas, and they're easily recognizable by that yellow patch on their front and the big black V under their neck. This guy loves to perch on fence posts and sing, trying to attract all the female meadowlarks to his area. Then we get to our state amphibian. Now, as a reminder, amphibians are those animals that start off their lives in the water, usually as something like a tadpole, very, very simple little animal, and then it grows legs and it crawls out onto land. Those are amphibians. Think of things like frogs. But our state amphibian is not a frog. It is a salamander. It's the barred tiger salamander. And salamanders are also found throughout the state, but they prefer areas where there are lots and lots of water. Now, we get to our state reptile. And our state reptile, we have lots of things to choose from in Kansas. There are lots of really cool reptiles, from lizards to snakes to turtles. All of these animals live in Kansas, but our state reptile is the ornate box turtle. And box turtles are very, very cool for a lot of reasons we'll get to in a few minutes. But I'm very, very glad that we have the ornate box turtle as our state reptile. And then finally, we have our state mammal. And I think it takes very little guessing to guess what our state mammal would be. Remember that mammals are anything that has hair and gives their babies milk. And our state wild mammal for Kansas is the bison, of course. Bison have been a symbol for Kansas for a very, very long time. They've been very famous for being out here in these prairies since the time of the Native Americans roaming the state before any pioneers even got here. There were bison, big symbol for this area. So, why do you think that grass is so common in Kansas? We have all these big open spaces, a lot of grass, hardly any trees. Well, the reason, again, that's because we don't have very much water to grow a lot of these big towering trees that other states might have. So we have just enough water to grow some scraggly plants, some shrubs, and a lot of grass. And sunflowers, like these wild sunflowers you can find along roads and in ranches. Now, bison and pronghorn obviously aren't the only animals who can live in the prairie. There are tons of examples of animals who can live out here because they eat grass. Tons of animals love to eat grass, and so they can be found out here in these prairies. And some good examples might be rabbits. They might include turtles, like the ornate box turtle, and all sorts of grass-eating animals that love living so much grass. Prairie dogs, another great example. If you drive through western Kansas and you look out your windows, you may just see some prairie dog towns. Lots of little bitty prairie dogs running around. So let's go ahead and we'll take a look at, we've taken a look at some of the state animals of Kansas. But there are also, and some of the common animals of Kansas. There are also some really rare animals that live in Kansas. And a great example of a rare animal that lives in Kansas is the black-footed ferret. Do you know that there are wild ferrets here in Kansas? Those are the black-footed ferrets. And they used to be found a lot more in the state, but over the course of time, there have been fewer and fewer of them until there was a point where people thought they had gone extinct, like dodos, dinosaurs, and mammoths. People had thought there were no more black-footed ferrets. Couldn't find it. But as recently as the 1980s, which is not all that long ago, they rediscovered ferrets, black-footed ferrets, in Wyoming, which is a state nearby here. And so they found out that there were still ferrets around. And they realized that this has got to be one of the rarest animals in the world. It's very, very rare. There were only a few left that had survived out in the wilds of Wyoming. So people thought, we need to try and help these animals. What they did was they captured some of them and brought them into a safe place where they could have lots and lots of ferret babies. It's called a breeding program. And all those baby ferrets have kept the ferrets going to the point where some of those ferret babies have been brought back to Kansas and released out in western Kansas to go and live free and in the wild, which is super, super cool. And zoos have been a big part of that. Zoos like ours, zoos like other zoos in Kansas, have helped by teaching people about black-footed ferrets. Now, ferrets are really, really cool for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons that they're super, super cool is that they eat prairie dogs. And prairie dogs, yeah, they're cute, but there are a lot of farmers who don't like prairie dogs. Because prairie dogs, they come in and they dig up the dirt and they make a big mess. They make all these holes everywhere where farmers don't want there to be a lot of holes. So one of the ways that we can help with that prairie dog problem is by bringing back the prairie dog's natural enemy, the ferret. And this is actually helping. The area where there are ferrets in Kansas, the ferrets are helping to take care of the extra prairie dogs. And it's a great help to farmers. So we're super glad that the endangered black-footed ferret is now back in Kansas, and we're slowly but surely seeing their numbers come back up. Isn't that cool? Now let's turn back to some of those more common animals of Kansas. And we'll start to think about some of those Kansas native symbols, like our state amphibian, the barred tiger salamander. Now, I'm very lucky today to be able to introduce you to a living barred tiger salamander. This is a picture of her right here. This is Carmen, and she lives here at Lee Richardson Zoo. Now I'm going to be introducing you to her right here on this camera in just a moment. Here she is. This is Carmen. So Carmen is a salamander, and salamanders, like I said before, they're amphibians. That means they're related to frogs and toads. And amphibians all have a lot of things in common. One of them is that they start off life in the water, like frogs and toads do. As babies, they are tadpoles. And when they grow up and they leave the water, they still have super sensitive skin. Now you can see her skin is really, really shiny, isn't it? And that's because her skin is a little bit wet. Their bodies need to stay wet in order to stay healthy. If their skin dries out, they can get really, really sick. And that's one of the reasons that you don't see very many salamanders in the western part of Kansas, because they need to be around water. They need to go back to water to lay their eggs, to have babies. They also need to keep their skin nice and moist so that they're still healthy. Now, a couple of questions that I get a lot about salamanders, like Carmen, is what do they eat? And that's a really good question, because salamanders are known for being carnivores. They eat other animals. In fact, they'll eat just about anything that can fit in their mouths. If I put my finger too close to Carmen's mouth, she'd probably try to eat it. She's just that much of a predator. In the wild, they'll eat anything they can put in their mouths. So they can eat things like crickets. They can eat things like small fish, maybe some frog eggs. They'll even eat some small mice or lizards if they can fit in their mouths. So they love to hunt. And the way that they hunt is that they stay very, very still, like Carmen's doing now. And they'll wait until something gets very close to their mouths, and then they'll snap, like a snapping turtle. They'll jump forward and grab the food before that animal even knows they're there. The other question I get a lot about barred tiger salamanders like this is, why do they have this black and yellow coloring all over their body? And there's a really good reason for this, is that this yellow is kind of a warning sign for other animals. See, in the animal world, when something is really, really bright, especially if it's a frog or a salamander, if something's really bright, it means that that is probably toxic. It's bad to eat that thing. It might make you sick if you try to eat that thing. So, this bright yellow color is going to warn other predators, bigger predators, things like foxes or bobcats, that, oh no, if I try to eat this thing, she might make me sick. So maybe I don't want to eat that. So, that's Carmen for you. We're going to go ahead and move along a little bit more and talk about something different. We're going to talk about our state mammal. And our state mammal is really, really cool. Everybody knows them. Everybody loves them. They're the bison. And bison are especially great, famous all across America for because they're very, very cool to look at, aren't they? They're such cool animals. I have some cool videos here of bison here at the zoo interacting with things in their environment. So, like I've said before, all this grass that's in Kansas is really good for lots of animals because they love to eat it. But bison enjoy eating other things too. You can see a video here of our bison Aster and Sienna, here she comes, wandering over to check out some vegetables. Looks like squash to me. So they're going to check out those veggies, and they can get a lot of good nutrients out of eating different things other than grass sometimes too. like the natural squashes and fruits and flowers that live out in the prairie. They're also really good at moving things around and mixing up the environment. You can see a video over here of Aster playing with a toy in his yard, a big ball. And in the wild, they will push things around. They'll push over trees. They'll nudge around different plants. And they'll actually change the prairie because of knocking over trees or moving around rocks. They'll change the prairie. And they act kind of like engineers or construction workers who change the environment in a way that sometimes helps other animals. Because where bison walk through, they trample over some of the bigger plants and they make a nicer path for smaller animals to go. So that's one of the really important roles that bison play out in the wild. Next, I want to tell you a little bit about our state reptile. And this is where I get really excited too, because I have another live animal guest to introduce you to. This is our state reptile, the ornate box turtle. And the ornate box turtle that I have here with me is named Buck. His name is Buck the box turtle. And he is a great example of an ornate box turtle. Now, ornate box turtles get their name because the word ornate means decorated or fancy. And ornate box turtles have a really well-decorated shell. This shell is covered in all these yellow markings, yellow and black markings. And those markings, yes, they're very pretty, but they also have an important job to do. These markings, they help ornate box turtles blend in with their environment. Take a look at this picture. You can see in this picture how well those yellow stripes of an ornate box turtle help them to blend in with all of the yellow grasses of the prairie. It makes them really good at hiding. And that's super important because ornate box turtles have to hide from all kinds of predators out here in the prairie. They are food for a lot of animals, things like bobcats and coyotes and foxes might try to eat a turtle. Now, it's very hard to eat a turtle because they have this shell, but the shell is not as hard as it looks. And if a predator like a bobcat is hungry enough and determined enough, they can still break through this shell and get to the turtle meat inside. So having that ability to hide, to blend in, is super, super important for box turtles. Now, a little bit more about box turtles. In Kansas, box turtles have actually been found less and less. We've been seeing fewer and fewer box turtles. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one reason that box turtles are becoming so rare in Kansas is probably the fact that they get hit by a lot of cars. They do. Because turtles, as they're trying to move around in the wild, sometimes they have to cross a street to get to the water, or to get to food, or to get to their homes. And so they have to cross the street, and unfortunately, a lot of the time, while they're crossing the street, they get hit by cars. So one of the things that I always tell people to try and do is if you're riding along in a car, keep an eye out for animals crossing the street, especially turtles. Because turtles, we know they're very slow. It takes them some time to cross the road. So they need a little bit of extra help. And so if you see a turtle in the road, always ask an adult if they can pull over. And maybe you guys, if it's safe, you could help the turtle cross the road. And it's important to remember to always take the turtle across the road in the direction they're already walking. Because if a turtle is trying to cross the road, he's going this way, and you pick him up and you set him back over here, the thing he's going to do is he's going to turn around and he's going to walk back into the road because he's trying to go over there. So if you need to help a turtle cross the road, always take him to the side that he's trying to get to. All right? The other threat to box turtles is people picking them up and taking them home. And I understand that it's very exciting. If you see a turtle, you may want to take him home. But if you take a turtle out of the wild, then that turtle's never going to meet another turtle, and they're never going to have baby turtles. And so we have fewer and fewer baby turtles being born in the wild, all because the grown-up turtles get taken and put into people's homes as pets. Now, turtles can be great pets, but if you want a pet turtle, you should go to the pet store rather than going into the wild. Because those wild turtles, they have a job. They have the job of having baby turtles someday. And if you pick them up and take them home, they can't do their job. Even worse, some people have been trying to sell turtles, like these ornate box turtles, from Kansas to other countries to use as pets, to places like Korea, Japan, all the way across the world. And they've been taking wild box turtles from Kansas, selling them overseas to use as pets. And that's not good either, because then we have fewer wild turtles in Kansas. So all I want to tell you is, if you want a pet turtle, don't get one out of the wild, get one out of the pet store. All right, now we move on to my third and final animal guest. And my final animal guest today is an animal that not everybody is the biggest fan of. It is the snake. So there are lots of kinds of snakes in Kansas. There are around 40 different species of snake that live in Kansas. But as many people as there are who don't like snakes, who think that they're dangerous, really most of the snakes in Kansas are not dangerous at all. They're completely harmless. And I'm going to introduce you to one of those harmless snakes here in just a moment. But just so you know, while I'm bringing this animal out, the only kinds of dangerous snakes that are in Kansas are rattlesnakes and copperheads and occasionally cottonmouths. This animal that I have in my hand is not dangerous at all. So let me introduce you to our ambassador snake. This is Frederick. And Frederick is a very, very cool kind of snake called a milk snake. He's called a Central Plains milk snake. And he's called a plains milk snake because he can be found in the prairie, which is also called the plains. Now, this animal has a really special pattern of colors, doesn't he? He has a pattern of colors that goes red and black and yellow over and over and over again. Red and black and yellow, and that looks a lot like a famous kind of snake called a coral snake. Coral snakes are a snake that you can find in parts of the United States, especially the American South and the Southeast. And they are venomous. And venomous snakes, they're the kind that if they bite you, they can make you very, very sick. And coral snakes, they have red and yellow and black stripes. But their stripes are a little bit different than those of a milk snake. Their stripes go red, yellow, black. Red, yellow, black, yellow, red. But if you look here at these stripes, and I'll zoom in a little bit more, the red on Frederick's body is always touching a black stripe. The red on his body never ever touches a yellow stripe. And that's the main way, the easiest way to tell him apart from coral snakes, is that on a coral snake, red touches yellow. And there's a rhyme that you can use to remember that. Red touches yellow, deadly fellow. It's a dangerous snake if the red is touching yellow. But nowhere on Frederick's body does red touch yellow. So he's not dangerous. He just kind of wants you to think he is. Because if you think that he's a coral snake, you'd be more likely to leave him alone. Well, that's what he thinks anyway. But here in Kansas, a lot of people see a snake that they think is venomous, and they react. They get scared. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that means they kill the snake. So in Kansas nowadays, looking like a venomous snake is a dangerous thing to do. If you look like a venomous snake, people might kill you. And that's true of Frederick. It's also true of a lot of other snakes, like the snakes on this slide. If you look here in the bottom corner, this is a bull snake. And bull snakes, just like milk snakes, are completely harmless. Unfortunately, they live in an area that's full of rattlesnakes. And they have the same colors on their body as rattlesnakes. And that means that a lot of bull snakes get killed too by people who think that they're rattlesnakes. My message to you about snakes today is that if we leave snakes alone, they're not dangerous to us. And there's no reason to go out killing snakes just because they're there. Snakes have a really important job to do too. Snakes' job is to go around and eat mice. Milk snakes are great at eating mice. In fact, that's how they get their name. They used to be found all the time in dairy barns. Barns that were full of cows where people were milking cows. And snakes would come into those barns to eat the mice. See, anywhere that there's cows and anywhere that there's corn, there are mice. Because mice love to eat corn. They love to eat cow feed. And snakes will come to eat the mice, which is a good thing. Because if there are fewer mice, then there's more grain and there's more cow feed to go around. And you don't waste all that food for the mice. So we need to let snakes do their job, which is the natural pest control guy, instead of going around killing snakes. That's my message to you about snakes. And with that, folks, I'm about out of time for my program, so I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye. But I hope you enjoyed learning about some of the native wildlife of Kansas with me and Frederick, Carmen and Buck, and I hope to see you all again sometime. Thank you so much for sitting through the program and enjoying, and I hope that you come down and visit us at Lee Richardson Zoo if you ever get the opportunity. Thanks again. Bye-bye.